Okay, so the next thing I want to do is just talk about the last parts of um of your paper and make sure everybody understands what needs to be done for the last sections of the paper. So, let's see. Okay. So, you've made it down to the end of the lit review, and we're just going to go over a few more sections. There's only 3 more sections to the paper. We talked already a little bit about the definition section, and that really should not be too long, maybe half a page. Each definition only needs to be a couple sentences. You're not going to get definitions from like Webster's dictionary or the American dictionary or anything like that. You're going to glean definitions from journals or books that you used for the paper. You don't need to copy an entire section from the DSM for your diagnosis. You can refer to it and give a couple sentences and maybe a few criteria. If you give all the criteria, that's going to take up 2 pages of your paper. So you don't have to do that. I don't want a third of your paper being a quote from the DSM. So if you think about it, if you publish this or took it to a conference, the people you're talking to are counselors. So they should have some familiarity with some of the language you're using, some of the theories you're using. You don't have to explain everything to them, but there may be some terms that the average counselor might not be familiar with. And those are the terms you want to explain to them. What terms would the average counselor not be familiar with? So maybe 3 definitions, couple sentences each should be good to go. So we're looking at about half a page, maybe something like that. The definition section, I'm not concerned about. If you only have 1 definition, I'm not going to take any points away. I wouldn't anyway. I just say, fix it. But the thing is, just definitions that you think are really necessary. I'd rather you use your paper for the model and the proposed study. I'm more interested in hearing what you think than reading about a definition. Okay, so that's the section right after the lit review. The next section is your model. Now remember, your model is not about what's been done. Your model is about what you'd like to do. So it can include things that have been done, but it also has to be original in some way. So it could, maybe you're creating an educational program for counselors, maybe you're creating a treatment program for clients. Either way, what most students end up doing is creating what I call a comprehensive model. And what that is, it integrates a number of theories into one more comprehensive model that works. So like the example I gave previously was, you might want to build trust with your client. So you're going to use person-centered. And then everybody has some type of irrational thought. So you might want to use CBT, REBT. Then you might want to try something new, like something with mindfulness or animals or expressive arts therapy or something like that. And then, maybe you want to go a little deeper and help them organize their future, find some purpose and meaning, and maybe go with a little existentialism. And then, do some goal setting. What do they want to do to incorporate this into their lives? That's my example. You can use any theories you want. I'm just saying you need to come up with an original comprehensive treatment model that can include multiple theories or applications. Individually, they may have been tried before. Originally, your unique concept is that you're going to tie a number of things together, make it more comprehensive, and together they'll work better than any single theory, probably. Yeah.
So it could be something that isn't necessarily based on research that we want to try in a certain.
Well, give me an example.
I don't know, just maybe a theory that I haven't found any research on, in my what I've looked up.
So the question is basically, can it be something you didn't find any research on and no findings in your research? Yeah. So I think you can include that as part of the whole, so include a couple things you did find, some research on, some results, and you can include one or two things you didn't find anything on. And, just because there's no research on it doesn't mean it won't work. But, in your lit review, you probably found some things that you could include that have been researched and some things that maybe haven't been researched, and you can have a mix. So, yeah. So I think you're going to have a few different things. You're going to have kind of in the model section, you're going to have kind of an introduction. Hey, this is why I'm proposing this new model. Well, one of the reasons might be these things have been tried individually, but together as a comprehensive model, they might have more significance or efficacy, or they might work better with clients. So you're combining them in a unique way to better meet the needs of clients. The second thing is you want to put your graphic in next. So the graphic that we work on next week in class of your model, that'll be refined, and you should have a nice graphical representation of the steps that clients will go through when using your model. And we're looking at about 8 weeks. It could be more, I've had people who needed time, so it spanned over a year, but it wasn't every single week during the year, but they needed more time to use their model. So I'm just saying 8 weeks in general, short-term therapy, but it could be longer. You could have a mixture of individual and group, or even classes. So remember that counseling can take place with individuals, with groups, or even psychoeducational. So you could have a mix of those. You could have just one of those. It's whatever you think works the best. Usually I would recommend, if you're mixing group and individual or all three, I would not do individual therapy first and then group therapy. I'd try to combine them. So each week they have an individual session and then they go to a group session later in the week. So I try to mix them rather than have them in segments. It just seems to work better. And then the next part is the description of your model in writing. And you walk people through how and why you're doing each part of your model. What are your thoughts behind it? If there's no research on a component of it, describe why you think it'll work, why you chose it. That's fine. And then a little closing statement to that section. So the model section is pretty straightforward. You're gonna have an intro, the graphic, and a description of the model. I'm thinking 2 pages. The graphic's gonna take up half a page right there. So the writing part is like a page and a half. All right. The last part is the proposed study. And this is a study that you will not have to run for this class, but you just have to describe it. And the way I propose a study is, you know, I'm like, I want the reader to think, oh, hey, this is a great model. Let's test it and see if it works. That's my goal. That's what I want the reader to think. So it's kind of like, you write up this model. The next step would be to try it out and see if it works. So you basically want to say in the introduction to that section that most of the evidence is pointing towards this model working better than the therapies individually. This combination should, you know, have better results with clients. And, you know, so the next step would be that you're proposing a study to try this model out with clients so that you can get some results and see if they're significant or not, if the model will actually help people. Of course, you're going to talk about whatever the issue is that you want to help. So that's kind of your intro. So the next part is, and we already talked about this in a previous class, we talked about the population and the sample. And that's just one paragraph. So remember, the population would be everybody who is struggling with a diagnosis or issue. And you can limit the population to like North America or the United States. But then the sample, remember, and we went through the 4 different types of samples, and we talked about which ones would probably fit your study. The easiest one is a sample of convenience, because you may have access to certain populations if you're at an agency or in a school district or something like that. I think the other one was like a stratified sample. Don't quote me on that word though. I think it is. And what is it? Cluster sample. There you go, cluster. Okay, so cluster sample. And yeah, since I'm recording this, let's get it right. So yeah, that would be the other option for most of you. And that is with established groups like classes in a school district, or if you're working for, you know, if you're in Western Pennsylvania, maybe there are established clusters with addiction treatment centers or something like that. So, you know, all right, population and sample should only be a paragraph. And there should be another lecture on here on that. Okay, the next section is, so you've got intro, population sample, 1 paragraph. And the last part, which you have not done yet, is methodology. And other than your model, this is the only new thing you have to do. So let's talk about methodology. Is basically the type of study, how you propose running the study. Are you going to you need to use some kind of measurement? Usually, if you find a measurement that's already been done, they should have the reliability and validity of that measurement. They should publish that with the measurement. I created a measurement, and just last week I had somebody track me down and email me and ask me if they could use the measurement. It's the measurement that's in the dissertation that I uploaded. But they also wanted to know, hey, how do I compute the stats in this measurement? And I was able to explain that to them. But so you shouldn't have to do more that, as far as measurements go, all you need to do is choose 1 or 2 measurements that you read about in your journal articles. Hopefully, they've already either used established measurements or they created a measurement that you liked. And they should have already done a study and found the reliability and validity and written about it. So look through the journal articles that you've used and see what measurements they used in those articles and pick 1 or 2 that you think would work well for what you're trying to do. And those are your measurements. And the measurements, each one of these things is really just 1 paragraph, The final thing is limitations. You're not going to know all the limitations, but you can guess at some. Limitations are, you're not sure whether your sample will represent 100% of the population, but hopefully it'll represent a large portion of the population. So that might be a limit. I'm just trying to think of what the limits might be. The size of your sample might be a limit. Maybe it'll be a small sample. And maybe your population's like really large. Maybe a lot of people are struggling with this issue. And the other way you can find limitations is maybe the measurement has some limitations. Maybe when they use those measurements in other studies, maybe they found some other limitations. I guess the final limitation would be it's usually a self-reported information from your client. So you either ask the client how they have improved or did not improve as a result of this in a survey and or an assessment, but they have to give you an answer. They could want to please you in some way, or maybe they're feeling great that day, but the next day they're not. So you might not get a totally accurate response from a self-reporting client, because you're not actually doing things like measuring heart rate, things, blood pressure, things like that. They're telling you how they feel or how they're coping with the issue. Hopefully they improve, but with self-report, that's another liability limit. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, so you can find measurements in your articles that you used. It should tell you the reliability and validity of each measurement. And we just talked about limitations. The other two things we need to talk about are the type of study and the procedure that you're going to use. And they are in chapters in the book. And I should have already had it open to that, but let's see what chapter it might be. Okay, so the first thing, and we've talked about this already, is do you want to do a quantitative study, a qualitative study, or a mixed method study? And basically, we kind of went over this already, but qualitative is usually in-depth interviews with individuals, and quantitative is using an assessment, and they'll fill out a Likert scale or multiple choice or yes, no answers, but it'll usually be either on paper or a computer. And so I think that the combination, you could leave an open-ended question at the end of a quantitative study. Is there anything that you would like to share that was not asked, in this assessment? Gives them an opportunity to write whatever they want. And we talked about they now have computer programs that'll analyze the transcription of a qualitative assessment. And of course, there's programs that'll analyze the data for a quantitative one statistically. So either way is fine, or you could do a combination of the two. Whatever you choose, there's no right or wrong answer. But whatever you choose, you just have to say why you think that's the best way to evaluate the research. Why are you choosing that? So the next thing is the type of study. So beyond quantitative and qualitative. And let's see. I mean, I can tell you basically that you are probably going to do what's called a test retest. And I'll explain that, but I just want to give you all of the possibilities here a second. Let's see. Okay. So there's true experimental, but that's kind of what they use in like laboratory settings because they can control all of the known variables, or at least take them into account. And they can manipulate the independent variable more. So I would say true experimental is more like clinical psychology or like testing medications, or even using lab animals. And so you're probably not going to choose that. Quasi-experimental is comparisons between groups of the same group at different times. You can have a moderate amount of control, but it's usually they don't use so much random assignment. They use multiple assessments. So it's somewhere in between where we are and experimental. So I would say that most of you are going to do what's called pre-experimental, and you're probably going to use what's called, and there's a table on all this in the book, and there's a paragraph about it in the book that explains this, but most of you will want the type of the design to be pre-experimental, and the measurement you're going to use is going to be a one-shot pre-test, post-test. Sounds complicated, but it's not. It just means that you make them take your measurement before you do the therapy and after the therapy, and you see if there's a difference. You can, if you want, have two groups, and you can have one group, get your new model of therapy or treatment, and you can have another group get whatever treatment they're normally receiving and see if there's a difference. That would be an added dimension. But the main thing is that pre-test, post-test, whatever measurements you choose, give it to them before and after your treatment and see if you made a difference. See if that difference is greater than the success that is normally seen in treatment of that population. So if you do decide to use two groups, one gets your treatment, one gets the normal treatment. So I did this study. It was the first study for solution-focused therapy had just come out. And if you had my theories course, I gave you the article that described this study. But up until that point, solution-focused therapy had only been used with individuals. So my professor thought it might work well with groups. So we wanted to study groups using solution-focused therapy. And we did pre-test, post-test, and we also did groups receiving normal school counseling and groups receiving solution-focused therapy. So we did see that there was a positive difference. Ethically, we decided beforehand that if we saw that there was a positive change using this new therapy, that we didn't want the control group to miss out. So we actually offered the therapy to the group that didn't get it as well. It took twice as much time, but ethically we felt bound to offer the other groups the therapy as well, because we saw that it helped people. So that's just kind of a nuance that if the therapy works, you might want to offer it to the group that didn't get the therapy. There is one more, and it's simply called descriptive. And this is when you use surveys, a casual comparative observation to describe an event, but there's no control over the event, no manipulation of any of the variables, no randomly assigned groups. So I think that's a little too general. So I think your answer is pre-experimental, one shot, which means you're only doing this one time, before they get your treatment and one time after they get the treatment. And that's when you give them the measurements that you found in your journal articles. All right, so that's your answer, I think. Hobbs, you're doing the training for counselors, so I'm trying to think about the measurements, how you would use the measurements to see, and it would really be, you give them, it's pre-test, post-test, but it's kind of like, do they have both the knowledge and the ability to use what you've trained them in? So knowledge and ability. Yeah. All right. So it's almost like a case scenario or something like that would be really good. So like part of it would be, do they understand how? And then do they describe kind of the application of it? Yeah. So I think that would be good. All right. Any questions about the proposed study? It's really only a page. So the proposed study is just one page. You should be able to fit that in one page. So it's not like a lot. All right.